embattled Congressman Matt Gaetz.
Matt Gaetz was one of the very few members in the entire Congress who bothered to stand up against permanent Washington on behalf of his constituents.
Matt Gaetz right now, he's a problem for the Democratic Party, and he could cause a lot of hiccups in passing of laws. So we're going to keep running those stories to keep hurting him.
If you stand for the flag and kneel in prayer, if you want to build America up and not burn her to the ground, then welcome, my fellow patriots. You are in the right place. This is the movement for you.
You ever watch this guy on television? It's like a machine, Matt Gaetz.
I'm a canceled man in some corners of the internet. Many days I'm a marked man in Congress, a wanted man by the deep state. They aren't really coming for me. They're coming for you. I'm just in the way.
Welcome to Firebrand Live. We're here in the Longworth office building, simulcasting, so make sure that you've got those notifications turned on so you get each and every one of our video reports. The Joe Biden administration is doing everything in their power to purge our military of people who just have independent thought or religious exemptions to vaccines or even medical exemptions. There has been a substantial impact on America's military readiness as a consequence of the flawed policies of the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and frankly, some of the Republicans have gone along with it, even some of the Republicans on the House Armed Services Committee. So in this episode, we have an unbelievable interview with 3 service members, active duty today, loving our country, willing to fight for our country and lend their talents to America's defense. But they're at risk of coercion, retaliation, expulsion, dishonorable discharge. You see, I think when Republicans retake control, we're going to have to find the circumstances where members of our military were driven out as a consequence of vaccine mandates, and we're going to have to restore those people. But you are going to be moved and inspired when you hear what these military members have been through, what their colleagues have been through, and now what they think about military service. It's really something. But a lot is happening on the Hill today as well. The Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, is testifying right now before the House Judiciary Committee. Our border is in total crisis, and the point that the American people have to get is that this is on purpose. It's not like the border can't be sealed. You know, the policies of Title 42, Remain in Mexico, and Safe Third Country, all working together alongside a physical barrier, a wall, changes to asylum laws. All of this under the Trump administration had dramatically reduced illegal immigration. And now we have the highest number of border migrant, illegal alien encounters in America's history. And we have the lowest number of deportations. Just a few moments ago, I questioned Homeland Security Secretary Ali Mayorkas on these matters. Take a listen. 1 million people are undetained, free, roaming about the country. They've gone before a judge. A judge has issued a final order of removal. How many ICE agents do you need to deport them?
Congressman, I think what we need is legislation to fix the broken immigration system. Because
you don't need legislation to overcome a final order of removal, right? Look, I get it. You want comprehensive immigration reform and a big amnesty thing. Very unlikely that's going to happen. So we have to operate under the laws that exist now. So under the laws that exist now, a judge has told 1.2 million people that they have no right to be here. Do you plan to remove those 1.2 million people?
Congressman, with the resources we have, and I would appreciate the opportunity to answer your question fully. With the resources we have to allocate those resources.
How much money do you need to deport all of them? How much money? How many agents? To deport the 1.2 million who a judge has said has no right to be here.
Congressman, there are a number of questions that your question raises with respect to whether all of those individuals actually have been given due process.
No, they have.
Yes,
these are the people who've had the due process, okay? And here's the point. You have no plan to remove them. You don't know how many ICE agents it would take, and you don't know how much money it would take because you actually don't want to remove them. Oh. That's why you issued the September 30th guidance that says, well, you know, if you haven't committed a crime and you just came to our country illegally, we're not going to remove you. Isn't that your position?
No, it isn't, Congressman. Not at all.
Well, then what is your
misstated.
plan to remove the 1.2 million?
Let me, if I may,
Do you have one?
Yes, we do. If I may, Congressman, as a former prosecutor, let me ask you a question. If one has a finite amount of resources and one has a finite number of hours, and one has a choice of removing 20 shoplifters or 3 fugitive armed bank robbers, how would you spend your time?
Well, I know how you've spent yours. I know how you've spent yours by decreasing by 48% the number of criminals you arrest, by deporting 63% fewer convicted criminals. You have the lowest deportation rate in the history of the department, right?
Your data that you cite is misleading.
No, it's your data. This is actually what your own agency is reporting. So do you think that it just might be the case that one reason that we will encounter the highest number of illegal immigrations in our nation's history this month and next month, because everybody knows that even if they come here, even if they go through the removal procedures, even if a judge issues a final order, you still think there might be more due process, and you have no plan to remove them. And then when I ask you what the plan is, you say, oh, well, resources, I got to make finite decisions. I go back to my first question. How many ICE agents to remove the 1.2 million?
Congressman, I'd be pleased to provide you with a resourcing data subsequent to this hearing, if I may.
And I think it's telling that you. I think it's telling that you got plans for pronouns and you got plans for misinformation. But when it comes to the plan to remove the people that have had due process, you don't have one at all. Now, 800,000 people have encountered your CBP agents, and those folks have been released into the country. Like, some of those people are going to commit crimes, aren't they?
Congressman, may I have a moment to answer your questions?
Will some of the 800,000 commit crimes, yes or no?
Undoubtedly.
Undoubtedly. And so the Americans who are the victims of the crimes for the people that you release in the country are collateral damage that you are willing to accept in order to have our border function as a turnstile. You're willing to accept that collateral damage.
Congressman, I couldn't disagree with you more. Let me give you, if I can, some data that will actually
more than the data. How about this?
Well,
how did it feel to you when you went to the border and the Border Patrol agents turned their back on you?
One Border Patrol agent turned his back on me, and I addressed that as
the
leader of the Department of Homeland Security. So if I can return to data, because I want to make sure that you have accurate information.
Everyone knows that you have more people coming in than ever, and you're removing fewer people than ever, and it's because you have no plan and because it's on purpose. See, I don't buy the theory that you don't know how to do this. I think you're actually a highly competent dude. But the reality is, your plan is to bring these people in and to send the message to the smugglers and the criminals that they will never have to leave. That's why your workforce turns their back on you. And you have tools that you could use to deport these people. You have facial recognition. You have flights going all over the country, dropping people off. And I think we ought to use the best tools in the country to find these folks, round them up like they were at the Capitol on January 6th, and deport every last one of them. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Bass.
Congressman, may I have a moment to answer a question?
No, he didn't ask a question.
So we're back live here at the Capitol, simulcasting, and you can see there the crisis at the border is not the result of an accident. It's not the result of neglect. This is a purposeful effort to do damage and harm to our country. And if our nation's sovereignty is degraded, if there are people who are victims of crimes, that's acceptable collateral damage for the Biden administration. It's sickening and unpatriotic. And it bears a sharp contrast to the patriotism that we see from our uniformed military. I represent Florida's 1st Congressional District. We have the highest concentration of active duty military in the country. And at a recent event in my district, I had a number of military members come up to me and express their frustration that the Department of Defense is just abandoning its own set of policies, its own requirements for review of exemptions to vaccines, and they're doing all of it for control. It is a purposeful Biden purge of our military. 3 great heroes coming up, 2 from the United States Air Force, 1 from the United States Army. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Take a listen. We're joined today by 3 of America's best: Air Force Captain Jordan Carr, Air Force Master Sergeant Nick Cupper,
and Army Major Sam Sigaloff. And I'll start with you, Major. How has your medical career progressed in the Army? Talk about the 9 years you've spent in just part of the administration of healthcare in the Army.
Well, first I want to say that any view that I express is solely my own. It is not held by the government, not by DoD, nor the Department of the Army. I am currently on leave, and my PAO officer is aware, and this disclaimer goes for all of us. So I've been in the Army for about 9 years now. I did ROTC in college. I did HPSP scholarship, which is to pay for medical school. Then I went to residency at Fort Benning, and I completed a family medicine residency there. And I was stationed a couple places, went to Alaska, and that's when COVID kind of exploded all around us. And I was the only doctor that volunteered to go out into the COVID tent, if you will, the COVID clinic. And for a month and a half of being out in that clinic, I did not diagnose a single case of COVID.
And are you able to practice medicine now in the Army?
No, so that leads me to where I am stationed now. I went to Fort Huachuca to be the medical director. I was their first pick, and they were my first pick. And then after a month of work, I was suspended for granting medical exemptions to soldiers who did not want to get the shot. So since September 13th, I have not been in medical practice, and I'm in threat of losing my license in Texas. Also, at this institution, ivermectin has been banned for off-label use. And it was not a medical doctor and not someone licensed to practice medicine. So this person that did this is practicing medicine without a license.
Well, America is certainly not stronger when people who are engaged in the provision of care to our service members are in any way treated unfairly. And let me go now to you, Captain Carr. Talk to us a little bit about your service for the United States Air Force.
Yeah, so I've been in the United States Air Force for about 9 years now. I come from a family of patriots. Every single family member generation has served in some capacity in the armed forces. My sister's a Space Force officer who's going through the same process that I am. I've been deployed overseas. I've had a lot of amazing opportunities in my career. And, this is unprecedented what's going on. And I could spend all day talking about myself, but I really don't want to do that. I want to talk about testimony that other service members are going through. The most disheartening aspect of all of this is the junior enlisted, they're the backbone of our forces, and the stuff that they are going through, same with our cadets at our military academies, what they're going through, they feel very alone and they feel isolated. And, part of the reason that we're here is to show them that they're not alone, that there are things that can be done that the American people can do on our behalf. And thank you for giving us this opportunity to share that.
What's been your observation of how some of these mandates have impacted morale and in the fighting force?
Yeah, so morale is very low. Again, like Sam said, these views are my own, not that of the Department of Defense, which I think is pretty clear since all three of us are plaintiffs in a lawsuit. The morale is very low. The people who got the shot maybe didn't want it or maybe didn't know that the mandates being passed down were unlawful. They're seeing it now too. I've heard testimony from service members who got the shot and they don't want to re-enlist. They're feeling it across the force. I have friends that have been grounded from flying. They're fully capable. They are able. They're trained. The taxpayers pay them to fly. They're not allowed to fly because they're unvaccinated. And the irony here is they've actually had to fly for vaccinated members who have had to call out sick. And so it's, members are feeling it across the force.
Let's bring in Master Sergeant Nick Cupper. Master Sergeant, one of the things that concerned me in an investigation that my office ran into the United States Navy is that when people submitted requests for religious accommodations, they were often met in response by a form letter, which to me indicated that an individual review of people's claim, how this decision was grounded in faith or scripture, wasn't really made. Do you have any observations about the process of requesting a religious accommodation and how the Air Force looks at those?
Yes, Congressman, thank you. I've seen hundreds of denied religious accommodation requests to include denied appeal requests. I've seen a handful of the approved ones, and all of them start with the premise that the government has such a strong interest in vaccinating us that while they determine all of our religious beliefs are to be sincerely held, they determine that even as strongly as our beliefs are, they're not as strong as the government's desire and need to vaccinate all of us. Even in situations such as my own, where I currently have no restrictions on me as an unvaccinated member at my location. I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to weekly test. I don't have to do any social distancing. My life at my job is the exact same as any vaccinated members, and I'm not unique in that scenario right now. But the only approvals they've been doing that I've been able to see and that court documents have shown are for people who are already on terminal leave, already in their final months where they won't return to a base. And in fact, the approval specifically says that they are only approving it because they will not return to a base. If the member's not returning to their duty station ever, that's not an accommodation. They're accommodating nothing.
I'm here talking with 3 service members, active duty in the United States military, who are dealing with the realities of vaccine mandates. And one thing that we've got to be really concerned about in the Congress and on the Armed Services Committee is whether or not these mandates affect readiness and our ability to do certain things. And I believe it was Captain Carr who said, that she had observed circumstances where there were impacts from some of the changes in the fighting force as a result of these mandates. Is there any advice that the 3 of you would give a member of Congress about how mandates affect readiness specifically?
So if we're talking about readiness, I feel like I got a pretty strong grasp on that one. And that's actually the main reason for all the denials of the religious accommodations is we need a ready force. And they're absolutely right as far as we do need a ready force. That's the whole point of our military, to be ready for anything that might come our way. However, according to the DoD's own numbers that are released publicly, to date, we've only lost 95 service members due to COVID. Now, every single death is a very sad, tragic loss. But if we're looking at it from a logical perspective, we've lost 95. At the same time, we've already kicked out over 3,200 service members for not taking the COVID vaccine. So if readiness is really the issue, 95 versus 3,200 is a significant difference. And from my perspective, and I don't speak for the DoD, but from my perspective, I'd say 3,200 is the bigger readiness issue with thousands more behind them.
Sir, if I can jump in, the irony there too is in the Air Force, we were given a pathway to voluntarily separate. Well, a lot of members are finding that when you submit a voluntary separation application, they're coming back denied, saying that we can't lose you. You're too important to us. And they're instead forcing them through the discharge process, and they're getting rid of them anyway. So which is it? Can you not stand to lose us, or are you going to try and force us out anyway?
Well, I believe that we ought to require a review of how these mandates have affected readiness, and it's my belief, though I would never want to prejudge any outcome, that driving people out of the military doesn't make our force stronger, it makes our force weaker. Major Sigaloff, one of the things that an investigation I conducted into some activities at West Point showed that when people were resistant to some of the desires of DoD, that there was a tremendous amount of retaliation against service members. Are you aware of any circumstance where, because of a view someone's held or because of someone performing their duties for DoD, that they were retaliated against?
Yes, and I want to make it clear that this is protected communication right now. And I am personally being retaliated against. I tried to commit felony crimes to CID, and my present for reporting those crimes was getting a negative counseling statement where I had to write about Article 94. And Article 94 is mutiny and sedition with a max penalty of death. That is very threatening to me. And that's the very fact of writing an Article 9 or any sort of negative counseling statement against me for trying to report a crime is also a crime under UCMJ. And the man that did that carries a longer than 4-inch blade knife everywhere he goes on post in the hospital, in the clinic, which is also a felony. There is a nurse in the building that put in a 15-6 commander's investigation, she put my HIPAA information in her sworn statement. There's another nurse in the building that put an overheard privileged patient-physician conversation into a sworn statement. She was in another room and heard me talking on the phone and put that in a sworn statement against me. There is an unbelievable amount of retaliation happening. I recently was had some of my charts in Alaska opened up to see if I was guilty of malpractice. They found I was guilty of malpractice. And these are people that haven't liked me for a long time because my thoughts and ideas have not changed. They've been pretty stable ever since the start of this in regards to the shot. If you don't want to get it, don't get it. If you want to get it, fine, go ahead. But they've opened up my charts and they've claimed that I'm guilty of malpractice, and now they have also suspended me and put a hit against my license, which will go to Texas.
That sounds like some of the most intense and severe tools that the medical profession has to bring against anyone. You know, Captain, I wanted to go to you and ask, there is a dynamic that plays out sometimes here in Washington where the military leaders come forward and they say, well, the percentage of people being vaccinated is increasing. So what we're doing is working. Are you aware of any circumstance, or are you concerned about the way people are coerced into taking the vaccine up against this mandate? And if you are, how does that coercion manifest?
Yes, sir, absolutely. So actually what got me first interested in all of this was, you mentioned West Point cadets. I know Hannah McDonald. I know Nikayla Sampson. They were one of the first, cadets at West Point to come out and say, I'm not doing this. Like, this is religious discrimination. What happened to them and their testimony? It's been published in multiple articles across the mainstream. But what happened to them was the first situation occurring, and this was pre-mandate. Once the mandates were implemented across the DoD, we started to see the coercion, the abuse happening across services. I know personally one security forces airman at Hurlburt. She's already discharged. She was encouraged not to appeal her religious exemption, so she didn't appeal. Instead, her chain of command encouraged her to apply for voluntary separation. They said, if you apply for voluntary separation, you're likely to get an honorable discharge. So she listened to her chain of command. She applied for voluntary separation. Her chain of command, the same one that was encouraging her to do this, denied her voluntary separation, and instead started racking up adverse paperwork against her, issued her with an Article 15. She signed the Article 15. She was threatened with jail time if she didn't sign it. And she got a general discharge with a misconduct code characterization. Her only crime or offense was not getting the COVID shot.
Why would any organization try to trick someone into a path regarding their career that would seemingly be a lose-lose for both the military and the service member? I mean, are we looking at a purposeful purge, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at, or is this a mishandling of policy?
Something very concerning to me is, if you are a believer and you are listening to this podcast, you need to understand that God-fearing service members are being intentionally purged from the services. And when I became a plaintiff in the lawsuit that we're in, initially, I did not feel that I should be forced to apply for a religious exemption. And there are many service members in my situation who felt the same way, because we did not, and we still don't believe that there is a legal mandate, that there is an FDA-approved vaccine. But the blessings that have come through this is that our religious convictions are much stronger, because we've seen through the Liberty Counsel lawsuits that this is a religious purge, that the people who are being discriminated against hold religious convictions and are people of faith.
Yeah, Major, did you have something to add to that?
It's a purposeful purge. Anyone who would disobey an unlawful order is being purged out of the military. And there is a shadow policy in place that is protecting all of these people enforcing this shadow policy. We've all put in IG complaints, and they've all fallen on deaf ears. And I have evidence that what's going on where I am is directly against Secretary of Defense policy, which is also, Secretary of Defense policy is also in line with the law that's been in place since 2003. And I have been suspended, and there's been no repercussions.
I'm Congressman Matt Gaetz here, joined by 3 active duty members of our military, sharing their observations and experiences with the vaccine mandate. And, Master Sergeant Cupper, one of the oversight responsibilities of Congress is to ensure that our laws are being faithfully executed and that we're responsive to conditions as they exist in the world. And when the coronavirus vaccine mandate was announced by Secretary Austin, we had a number of statements from members of Congress regarding their reaction to that. And really, while no one here speaks for the DOD, you're all expressing your First Amendment right to petition your government, and I'm a government official. I want to really understand from you what you expect of your representatives and lawmakers in the face of this decision by DOD. What should the Congress be doing to be doing right by the men and women who wear the uniform?
Well, Congressman, what I would like to see, and I think I could probably speak for my two partners here, is I would like to see Congress and the government hold the DOD accountable to the law. The law states that any emergency use product, whether it be a vaccine, a test, or otherwise, cannot be mandated to any service member without letting the service member know you have the right to refuse it. Unfortunately, and I don't want to suppose malicious intent or anything, but the fact on the ground is there has been no FDA-approved vaccine available to service members since the beginning of the mandate. Now, the Secretary of Defense's memo specifically says that we will only be mandated to take fully approved, fully licensed, and labeled vaccines. At the time of the memo, Comirnaty was the only one. Now you have Spikevax as an approved one. The problem is, and we have ample evidence, recordings from Pfizer, recordings from the FDA, documents from the CDC that all say Comirnaty has not been shipped. No one has it. Spikevax has not been shipped. Nobody has it. I mean, my base specifically, I have multiple email correspondence over months where my basic knowledge degrees, we only have emergency use vaccine. So whether it's malicious intent or not, every single service member since the day of the mandate who has been mandated to take a vaccine has been illegally mandated to take an emergency use vaccine. And it's all predicated upon one memo written by Dr. Terry Aderim. That memo mistakes what the FDA says about an interchangeability between the emergency use vaccine and the fully approved vaccine. The FDA was attempting to say it's only medically interchangeable, but they had a footnote that specifically pointed out that they were two legally distinct vaccines with certain differences. This memo written by Dr. Terry Aderim says that those two vaccines, the emergency use and the fully approved one, because the DOD knew they didn't have the approved one on hand, she said in there that they will be used both interchangeably to meet the mandate. And every doctor, every commander has been going off of that. And so every time we file an IG complaint or we complain up to our commander, and you can't blame our commander, they're low level. They don't control the entire DOD. They're just doing what they're told, and I understand that. But when we complain up, everyone gets referred to that one memo that is an unlawful order in and of itself, if for no other reason than the fact that that order takes into account in no way that the fact that these vials of vaccine are not labeled appropriately as the Secretary of Defense has required. So Dr. Terry Aderim's memo that she wrote is unlawful, and I believe they knew that because they routed another memo a few weeks later for signature that they ended up not signing. Mr. Gilbert Cisneros was requested to sign it. It would have effectively just said, hey, we have to follow the law. If there's an emergency use vaccine and the member wants to take a fully approved one, you have to allow them before you punish them. And what ended up happening is all the services got their chance to comment on whether they thought that should exist or not. And in the Air Force's comment specifically, they effectively said, we've already been discharging people, we've already been punishing people under the auspices that this was legal. If we have to now have this new memo that proves that what we did was illegal, it's going to cause a lot of headache. We recommend you not sign the memo.
And almost to a person, the folks I know in military service are quite versed on regulations. That's why a lot of people excel in the military, is the ability to understand, adhere to regulations, to be able to perform the functions that our nation requires the same way each and every time with a great degree of confidence. We are right now in the process of having the hearings that establish the National Defense Authorization Act. And as a member of the Armed Services Committee, I will be introducing amendments to the National Defense Authorization Act to ban any mandate for experimental vaccines for the COVID-19 vaccine as it currently applies to the military. And I will also be filing an amendment to restore, to rank and pay anyone who was forced to leave the military or coerced to leave the military as a consequence of these vaccines. That's the good news. The bad news is that if the vote were held on those amendments today, it would fail. it would fail because the majority party would oppose it, and even some in my party would oppose it. And so I want to get your advice in this section of our interview about how you would go about persuading someone who believes in these mandates, maybe to reflect on some of the insights that you've shared. And I'm going to present to you, this is an August 9, 2021 statement from United States Representative Mike Rogers of Alabama, who's the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee. And he says in part, today, Secretary Austin announced plans to require all members of the military to be vaccinated against COVID-19 starting in mid-September or upon licensure by the Food and Drug Administration, whichever comes first. He continues, vaccines protect our men and women, many of whom live in cramped and crowded conditions, from the spread of disease while at home or deployed across the globe. Our adversaries will take advantage of everything they can over us. We must not allow COVID-19 to be a hindrance of our force. Secretary Austin earlier confirmed that as of mid-July, over 70% of active duty troops had received at least one vaccine shot. That is encouraging news, and I hope that number reaches 100% quickly. I also want to encourage President Biden to work with the FDA to approve the vaccine as soon as it's safe to do so. Who wants to go first? What argument would you present to Congressman Rogers to sway his view that anything less than 100% vaccination rate is not acceptable?
May I start?
Go right ahead.
So I'm going to be publishing an episode on Sunday, May 1st, on After Hours with Dr. Sigloff. I encourage everyone to listen to it because I think I just recently learned this, and I've heard this recently, that, you want to give the right treatment for the right disease. And so if you have a broken arm, I'm not going to give you an injection to help with, some infection you may never get. And so I say that to say, listen to that podcast. I don't 100% believe that this is a virus. I think this is a poisoning that's going on. And it sounds insane, but it's the only thing that brings all of the unrelated medical issues together. Like, how can two people in one household, like my parents, that lives off a well, my dad gets sick and my mom didn't? It's supposed to be this horribly contagious disease. How do smokers get less disease than non-smokers? It's supposed to be a respiratory illness. Well, if nicotine blocks the poison from working, then that's how it helps keep you from becoming ill. And I'm not encouraging anyone to smoke, but there may be use for nicotine in a patch or a gum. And so if we're being poisoned, and let's say the shots are hurting people, which we know they are, then yes, we want to keep our adversaries from taking advantage of the U.S. And the way we do that is we don't do what our adversaries want us to do. And they want us to inject our soldiers so that we don't have an effective fighting force, because we will not have an effective fighting force. If we kick out, let's say, 3,000 people and we can't work with those few people, how more or less will we be able to work if 5% are non-combat effective? Or more realistic, maybe 50%. Right now, there's an article about 80 dead soldiers from Fort Bragg. 80 in the past year, 2 years. That's an insane number of dead soldiers. That's unusual. That needs to be investigated. So we need to take a pause on an ineffective treatment that has negative efficacy, meaning you're more likely to get infected if it is indeed an infection and not a poisoning, which it seems like it is, because all the things that work for this particular type of poisoning seem to help people.
Captain Carr, what would you say to a member of Congress who held that view that I expressed?
From a national security standpoint, we stand to lose upwards of 500,000 military members because of these mandates. That's total force. There's only a couple million service members serving right now. So from a national security standpoint, I think it is very important. Also, these COVID shots are not safe, nor are they effective. Members who have gotten the vaccines have many issues. They're scared to report them. And from a safety and efficacy standpoint, I know Nick can speak personally on this. He is basically Superman. He has so many antibodies, and that's not being considered. And he has an exemption because of his antibodies for almost every single vaccine in the military.
Captain Carr is absolutely right. As far as in the past, I've gotten natural immunity exemptions to every single shot that I'm required to take, with the exception of the flu. I understand the flu changes. I get that. But the data that's available for the COVID, it shows unequivocally, with the exception of a very small study out of Kentucky that the CDC posted with maybe 235 participants, it shows unequivocally that natural immunity, especially if you can prove you actually have it, is better than the shot alone. I mean, even today, we just learned that Vice President Harris got COVID only 25 days after her 4th shot. That doesn't seem like a very effective vaccine to me. But if you look at the numbers of this, and I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but Walgreens, they're one of the biggest vaccinators we have in this country. There's Walgreens on every corner. They actually have a website where they list all the positive cases by percent based on how many shots a person has, whether it's 0 shots, 1, 2, 3, whatever. If you look at their data, and it's up-to-date data, you're seeing that the positivity rate for the unvaccinated member is far lower than anyone else. 1 shot, 2 shot, 3 shots, doesn't matter. Which that directly speaks to natural immunity, because at this point, there are very few people in our country, or in the world for that matter, that haven't already had COVID. Me specifically, I've gone and taken 8 different antibody tests now, and the most recent one I just took was last week, 15 months after I had infection, and I'm still reading off the chart on the test. My base immunologist even wrote me a letter of endorsement for my appeal stating that I am immunized. And what we're going to have here is we have an all or none solution, which is not the right solution. So if I were to talk to another member of Congress, if I were going to try to convince them, first off, I would come to them with compassion. I wouldn't come at them from a stance of anger or a stance of sadness. I'm a very logical person. I would come with the numbers. I would come with an understanding that, look, I get it. We wanted these shots to be a miracle cure. Everyone was looking for some hope. They've clung to it. Unfortunately, this isn't the miracle cure everyone looked for. And with the variants changing, with the waning efficacy and everything else, and I mean just the myriad of data, it's clearly not the cure it was. If you look at the Air Force alone, from the date the mandate started until today, the Air Force has seen a 400% increase in COVID deaths, whereas the United States, as a general population, has only seen a 58% increase in COVID deaths. But at the same point, the Air Force's vaccination rate has increased by 73%, whereas the U.S. has only increased by 24%. How on earth is that possible? And when you look at the DoD as a whole, you see the similar thing. You see a 179% increase in deaths over that same time frame. Why is it that with a younger, healthier, more vaccinated force, we're seeing more COVID deaths per capita than the United States is seeing with a much older, unhealthier, less vaccinated population?
One thing I worry about is that the data would be unpersuasive to people who are motivated by corrupt purposes. And frankly, I see a little too much of that in Washington, D.C. when it comes to the influence of Big Pharma. Big Pharma has multiple lobbyists for every member of Congress. They shell out millions of dollars in campaign donations to people. And then you have oftentimes a revolving door between a lot of these public health entities and big pharmaceutical companies. I mean, I've seen in the military at times a concerning revolving door between senior leaders in the military and defense contractors. And at times, that's where Congress plays an important role to make sure that conflicts of interest and bias doesn't in any way impact decision-making in a bad way. And what I have to report to the three of you is that I think that people don't want to hear it on the data because, you know what? Big Pharma just loves the idea of having everyone forced to utilize their product. I mean, who wouldn't want to live in a world where the government was forcing you to utilize your product? And so, as strong as I think that appeal may be, Nick, I think there also has to be an appeal with service members about, these are our bravest patriots. We have a volunteer fighting force. The best of the best volunteer for our military and are willing to go anywhere and do anything and fight everyone and accept any mission on behalf of the rest of us. And so if you retaliate against those people, if you improperly coerce them, if you try to hem them in against regulations, it creates a far broader problem. I mean, all of you have made the decision to serve in our military. Are there any of your family members who are concerned about your careers and the opportunity that you have to make a patriotic contribution based on these mandates? How do they think about this?
I know. So I believe I'm the closest one in this group here to retirement. I can retire next year so long as I'm not kicked out in the meantime. And I mean, I'm a grown man. Obviously, my mom, my dad, they're very worried for my career. They're very worried for the nearly 20 years I put in and that it may all go to waste. they're also very worried about me being forced to take an experimental vaccine. They don't want to see that. And I used to recruit for years, and I can tell you there was just a report that came out that shows that for the Air Force alone, their population that wants to join, they've lost 50% already. People are not wanting to join anymore. And honestly, if it's my own kids, I'm not going to suggest they join. In fact, I'm going to do whatever I can to dissuade them. Now, in my career, up until this point, things have been relatively fine. I mean, you have an issue here or there that you discuss with your command, once and again, and you get it resolved, or maybe you think something stupid and that's, just water cooler talk. Never in my career, and like I said, this has been nearly 20 years, never once has there been something that I have been this passionate about because I realize how wrong it is. I mean, I would not put my name to a lawsuit. I would not buck against this if it were not that serious. I'm literally putting my entire career on the line here. I've got a family of 4 children and my wife. 1 child's adopted and disabled from Armenia. If I don't get this retirement, I lose my medical. This is something I've worked my entire life for. But I know what's right, I know what's wrong, and I'm willing to put it all on the line to do what is right. And I've tried to make that extremely clear to my leaders that, look, if a person like me is willing to put everything on the line, you might want to listen to me. I might not be crazy.
Amen to that. Absolutely. Captain, did you have something to add to that about just how family and loved ones, look at this dynamic that our service members are put into?
Yes, sir. So like I said before, I come from a family of service members. We honestly can't believe what's going on. I feel more concerned for the junior enlisted, the members who were coerced or tricked into getting this shot that is not an approved shot. And they did it because, like Nick, they have family to consider, their lifestyle. There's a tech sergeant who just joined a lawsuit. He couldn't even afford to pay the $500 for the lawsuit. And so a couple officers helped him because, he's concerned about supporting his family. There's a Navy chaplain. I have his testimony right here, actually. He's 16 years in service. He was holed up in a hotel with his family of 5 and their dog, his pregnant wife, for 7 months. He had to shell out $21,000 of his own money because if you are not vaccinated, this occurred when the mandates were first implemented. If you are not vaccinated, they declared that you could not PCS, and they were in the middle of PCSing. So for 7 months, he and his 5 family members with his pregnant wife and dog were in a hotel, and they had to shell out their own money for this. He still hasn't gotten reimbursed. And this is a Navy chaplain.
All 3 of you know these regs a great deal, and there is litigation that you've joined to resolve some of these issues. And there are going to be a lot of folks from my district who are wearing the uniform, who have loved ones who are wearing the uniform, who are going to watch this, and they're going to think the 3 of you have tremendous bravery, and they're going to want to know how they can connect with you, how they can follow the progress of this litigation and any rulings that come out of it. So how can people stay informed into the battle that you're waging?
So I don't have any social media, but there are groups that are out there. So Terminal CWO on Telegram, Military Freedom Keepers on Telegram, Fight for Veterans with the number 4 on Telegram. Those are ways that you can reach out to people. There are service members helping each other through this process and, putting out, how to go through the religious exemption process, how to go through the appeal process. So those are good ways.
What about the litigation? How can folks follow the litigation?
So with litigation, one of the biggest lawsuits, and this isn't ours, but Liberty Counsel has a couple different ones. They have a pretty good Instagram, Twitter following. If anyone wants to look up Liberty Counsel, they really focus on the religious freedom. Our particular case is Coker v. Austin, and honestly, for that, it's really just a matter of you can look it up online, and there's websites that allow you to, for free, look at the documentation. We're not like Liberty Counsel. We don't have a big presence on media. We're not trying to blast it out there necessarily, but some of the sites, the terminal sites that Jordan was talking about, they are also on Instagram. Terminal CWO, Military Freedom Keepers, and what they will do is they will kind of be a collective source for all these lawsuits, and they will oftentimes post what's going on, what the big updates are. Little things don't really matter, but the big updates. And give people hope. That's one of the biggest things with all of us, especially at the beginning of this. A lot of these service members, they don't know there's anyone else standing with them. They might be the only person in their unit, and they don't know any better, and they feel alone, they feel scared. I've honestly been extremely fearful with the steep rise in suicides we've seen across the DoD that some of these members may take their life waiting for the DoD to do the right thing, which it may never do.
Dr. Sigaloff, how can folks follow your podcast and on what platforms?
So I'm on all platforms where you can find podcasts. It's After Hours with Dr. Sigaloff. Also, I'm in a military advisory council with Truth for Health Foundation. That's with Dr. Lee Valit. And it's a 401c3. It's a non-for-profit, non-political group. And she is giving grants to soldiers that need money for lawsuits and helping them get through this process. And she's also donating a lot of her personal time to treat soldiers who have been injured. And I want to put a little plug out there. If any general sees this and wants to have an actual understanding of the injuries that are happening to soldiers, email me at afterhours@1791.com. That's afterhours@1791.com. Or get a hold of Dr. Valit. I will get you in touch with Dr. Valit, and she will give you a true, honest opinion with no big money, with no outside influence, with nothing other than truth and knowledge and wanting the best for our service members and our country members, to give you that, because any general can make this stop right now.
I want to thank the three of you not only for fighting for our country, but for fighting for your fellow service members who are, I think, waiting with bated breath for these legal determinations and hoping that their careers and lives will not be ruined. I will endeavor in the House Armed Services Committee to pursue legislation to block the administration of these mandates and to restore the people who have been harmed by them. I think that restoration is going to be very, very important, and we're going to have a process for that because, the United States military is possibly the most important institution in our government because it's what keeps us safe, and it always has attracted the best and brightest among us. And if we want it to continue to do so, I think there are a lot more people in Washington who need to hear the feedback that all of you just gave, feedback that you're entirely entitled to give under your First Amendment rights to petition your government. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to sharing updates regarding your progress and the progress we're able to make in the Congress. You guys have been fighting for this great country, and you deserve lawmakers and representatives who will fight for you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.